there. Welcome to the Pelvis Project podcast. I'm Megan.
And I'm Roxy. We're two pelvic health experts brought together by passion for our careers, entrepreneurship, motherhood, and the desire for intentional relationships.
Join us in our mission to spread pelvic floor awareness and start conversations surrounding the truth behind genuine health, imperfect wellness, and joyfully navigating life. We are so glad you are here with us.
Let's start the conversation.
Good evening, Roxy.
Good evening, Megan.
We're back. And I realized that I'm pretty sure on the last two podcasts, we forgot to do the Tell Me Something Good. So let's start with that.
I just got back from a hiking trip with some girls.
Right.
We hiked a 14er. It was the hardest one I've hiked, I think. And the wind was so strong. 55
Where
to
were you
60
at
mile
again?
an hour. We stayed in Twin Lakes, Colorado.
Okay.
Hiked Mount Belfort. And we were holding on the boulders at the top, trying not to get blown over. It was incredible.
Oh my.
But it was well worth it.
Oh, that's
But
awesome.
it was good. Girls trip, mountains, meeting goals.
Yeah. Crushing goals.
Well, I don't know about crushing. I was crawling up the end of the mountain. But yeah, we did it.
That's awesome.
Made it back. That's my something good.
Let's see. My something good is, it hasn't happened yet, but it's getting close. We're going out of town next week to the lake, and we haven't gone out of town yet this summer. And then if you would backtrack even further, I just haven't taken a lot of time off, just off. So spring break, I think we had a couple of days and then dove right back into crazy chaos. So I'm just really looking forward to that. And yeah, trying to enjoy the rest of the summer with kids home. So, okay, well, what we're going to talk about today is something that's been coming up a lot at my clinic. And so I don't know, Roxy, how much here recently you've had this, but a lot of conversation around this and then lots of patience with this. And I'm glad, except for the fact that they're self-referring and we haven't yet broken the mold of having physicians kind of be ahead of the game on this. But we're going to talk about Prehab for hysterectomy and then rehab following hysterectomy. And then I personally have just started to we've had this come up at the clinic. And then I had a friend that is in my circle that reached out having some questions. And once I explained to her how prehab can help, she's like, oh my gosh, this makes total sense. Why aren't we talking about this? And then also some of the things that happen post in those first early days, why aren't we talking about that kind of stuff too? So we're going to kind of talk through this and why prehab can be helpful beforehand, and then kind of things to consider during the surgery and then after, and kind of go from there. So I was about ready to say, if you have any questions, let us know. And I'm like, oh yeah, we're on a podcast. We are not in front of an audience. Okay, so let's talk about first things first, prehab. So we have there's some different camps here. Some people are going in for hysterectomy and it could be for some reason where they're not really experiencing a lot of pain. It can be different reasons why someone's going to have a hysterectomy. But if someone has had years of discomfort, or let's say painful periods, or adenomyosis, or endometriosis, or anything like that, your body has laid down some pain patterns, and there's probably been some tension that has come up during that time. And a lot of times people also have pelvic pain. And if we overlook the fact that we could potentially be going into the surgery, and often we're kind of led to believe oh yeah, you're going to have the surgery and your pain's going to be gone. But the pain patterns are still laid down, and the tension and the tissue and the muscle. So if we can think about having somebody come in ahead of time, and even if it's a couple of sessions where we are assessing the pelvic floor and we are identifying, ideally, if we've had pain for years, we would have already been in and been working on stuff. But we can kind of get a baseline for where we're at and give some intervention and direction on where to get started. So hopefully you have a couple of weeks ahead of time. But in that, we can go ahead at that point and start teaching proper breath work and pelvic floor, like essentially down training, like lengthening of those pelvic floor muscles, because that's then going to translate very beautifully into like post surgery into recovering. We'll talk more about that. But also in those sessions leading into hysterectomy, we can also be talking about pressure management, things to pay attention to when you're getting out of bed, how to get out of bed, how to get out of a car. What are those first few days and weeks going to feel like, and what things you need to look out for, and what can pop up, which we'll talk about that. So it really does help you go into the surgery feeling more confident, because often what people are seeing or what they're reading is they're looking up hysterectomy and they're reading all these scary things. I've had people say it all the time. They're like, well, I'm just really nervous. I just see all these little scary things that can happen. And we don't have any idea really of what's going on. So knowledge is power. So when we're educated and we know what to expect and how this recovery is going to go, and you have a teammate, like somebody that you can reach out to, i.e. your pelvic floor physical therapist, if they know what they're doing, then we're on your team. So simple questions like, oh my gosh, this shoulder pain is so bad. We'll talk about why people can get shoulder pain after a hysterectomy. Remind me, like, what are your tips? Those sorts of things. So it really kind of sets the stage. And then also you can go ahead and learn some of the things that we're going to be doing before, so that way it's not you trying to manage all the things and learn something new.
Yeah, I mean, I think we approach this similarly like we would birth prep,
Yeah.
of just saying, okay, if post-op, we know that there's going to be inflammation. We know the body's going to be kind of in a protective mode. We know that even if it's it's for the better that this procedure is being done, but the body is going to be protecting us or guarded a little bit. And so on the front end, just thinking about we can anticipate maybe some abdominal pain, or we can, and we'll talk about some of these symptoms. We can anticipate that. So then we can be cueing, good mechanics. We can be cueing good posture. We can be preventing. If we're waiting on people to come after the fact, then we miss a window there. And I always think about, after a procedure, this woman is going to get up out of bed. She's going to get to the bathroom. She's going to have to stand up out of the bathroom. She's going to have to get out of her car. Like, life
Yep.
doesn't cease just because a procedure happens. And so to be teaching the patient, how do the abdominal muscles work? What's the best way to prevent pain or to prevent compensation during this not postpartum, sorry, post-op season? Can really set us up for success then even beyond that. But I just think that we have to be mindful that even if someone is resting, the movements that they make during their rest or their post-op and their rest and their like healing process, they can still be having dysfunction happening during those like minor activities of just transfers and walking and things like that. And so instead of like the movements that they're going to be making anyway, let's have that work for them, have that help their body be healing rather than having that work against them and deepen layers of compensation or bad habits that then we have to overcome later. And so some people are like, well, is it really important? And absolutely it is. We can also identify dysfunction before that. And if we can set you up to be the healthiest and your body to be the most sound before you go into that procedure, I just think it's really cool to see then how just better people feel afterwards or more successful than they're moving and their confidence even going into that procedure.
Yeah.
Knowing that they've connected with these parts of their body that maybe they were uncertain of before.
I think that if we look at this as like more of a, partnership with physicians so that we have better outcomes, that's really the goal here. And that's what we see happen. And it is so wild. The people that I know that have, even if they're not seen, but they have an education session or something like that, they do better afterwards because there's an ease about it. Because they're like, oh yeah, you told me this was going to happen. It's like, you don't need to be scared about it. The mind is powerful. When something happens, we don't know why, and it hurts and we're afraid and we get this fear laid down and then that perpetuates pain. Like if they're like, oh yeah, she told me this was going to happen. And I know like I have these tools and it makes a huge difference. So couple things to think about and just to consider. And often I've had people tell me that like the surgeon came out and describes all this to like whoever's there to pick them up. But you're put in a Trendelenburg position. So your body's at an angle. And it just means that when you're angled, you are tilted so that your feet are higher than your head, if you will.
Not completely flat on a
Yes, not
bed.
flat. Yeah. I
Yeah.
wish I could show you a picture. So anyway, first off, so right there, you're like your body's just in a little bit of a different position. And then they have to fill your abdomen with like a gas, if you will, like CO2, like, and that just provides them to be able to do the surgery and see everything better. And so afterwards, you have a lot of potential bloating and pain just from that alone. And I mean, essentially with that also, you're going to have some small incisions. So either like lateral or vertical, like small incisions. And that's just from the laparoscopy. Essentially, I mean, if you go in and you're going in to have a hysterectomy, and let's say you have a large fibroid, I recently just had somebody where like they actually couldn't remove the fibroid that way. And so they couldn't deliver it vaginally. And so she essentially ended up having almost like a C-section scar from that too. So there are definitely these nuances and things that like pop off with this, but we're talking more of like just a general straightforward C-section. So one of the most common things we see after this is shoulder pain is really common after this procedure. And that's actually due to the phrenic nerve being irritated from like the surgery and from the bloating and all of that. So essentially too, I was always told like, oh yeah, you get the shoulder pain when you have, increased gas in the abdomen. But I really think it's interesting for it to be broken down of like that phrenic nerve being irritated as well. And so truly I had somebody that was like, if you wouldn't have told me that, I would have thought I had a shoulder injury. Like it was so bad.
Mm.
And so that alone, just having that conversation, and then sure enough, everybody says, yep, I had the shoulder pain and I knew what it was and it went away. So I think that alone is so important, I think, in that recovery. So we also can have kind of this disruption that happens in the bowels. And so the intestine, like the intestinal movement and the bowel can stop properly pushing food and waste through the colon, causing constipation without necessarily like a physical blockage. And so this is just common after an abdominal surgery. And so then the symptoms with that would be bloating, nausea, and then potentially severe constipation. It's just like a temporary halt of the peristalsis that can happen. And again, it's common, it can happen. It's not necessarily, like we said, that there's a blockage or anything, but in all of this, it just slows everything way down. And it's something to consider because being constipated when you're also full of gas and all of that and an abdominal surgery can be extremely uncomfortable.
Well, and I think we'll layer that in sometimes with pain meds that
Yeah,
also have
oh,
a
for
side
sure.
effect of constipation. And then we're also, I think, dealing with just the delicacy or the vulnerability of these scope sites and, just healing tissue that a lot of that extra pressure just doesn't feel well. And it's also not really helpful for healing, for that just to heal really well if there's someone's having to strain or someone's, having trouble passing that bowel. So I think you explained that well. And then adding on just pain meds can
Yeah, definitely.
also do that. And people aren't moving. You're not moving as much.
Yeah, not moving as much.
You're recovering. You don't get that natural trunk mobility that helps us digest on the regular. And so there's just a lot of layers to that.
Yeah, for sure. And so things that like we go over ahead of time and just like giving recommendations of just making sure you have things like warm fluids that you can drink after surgery that can kind of help get things going. One thing that we were taught in a course was chewing gum and like and rocking in a chair, like the gentle rhythm can help that stress response. And you can just pair it with, chewing gum. And basically like you're just trying to kind of get the peristalsis, like try to help get all that going. And I mean, you have to be careful because in some situations, like chewing gum can make you swallow more air. And like, it's a whole thing, but like the reason behind it, it is helpful to kind of get things moving. And then another thing that is why it's good to go over to see somebody prehab is something like gentle bridging. Okay. So like knowing that all right, a little bit of movement is okay, but we're having this conversation ahead of time. But if we didn't, you wouldn't know that that stuff is okay. And so then you're going to have more lack of mobility, which then is more like you're leading more into the constipation, the continued gas and bloating, so that when you're educated better and you know the safety, like the limitations around like what movement is okay, again, that helps with your outcomes, which is really amazing. So walking and breathing and all that stuff, which we would go over breathing ahead of time and make sure that you're doing it correctly to help with the expansion in the abdomen.
So then when we're looking at just post-op, one of the most obvious sites of discomfort is that incision, and those can be scopes or can be incisions, like Megan kind of hinted at. Sometimes people get out of those surgeries with just a little, I mean, in someone's incision doesn't always look like everyone else's, and so just kind of know there can be discrepancies there. But the way that we really recommend that we deal with that pain is a couple things. We can use like a TINS unit, which is just a little electrical stimulation. It can be used directly over the abdomen or at the sacral region, kind of on like your lower spine or kind of right over like your butt area, like higher up. But it just depending on how, like what the surgery method was used and how the cuff is stitched, that sacral region can be real sore. And so that's one way we can do that. Thinking about just the mobility that Megan just talked about, that we're really emphasizing that for bloating, but that can also just be a pain mechanism of just gentle movement that isn't overly aggravating to that post-op incision discomfort. And then really when we have these people in, we're discussing movement before, we're also prepping for then like pain after. But some other education that we really want to emphasize before surgery is just the use of like leg compression so that we get that good circulation moving through their body, and that blood or the blood isn't pooling in their feet or their legs. And that's pretty common any surgery that you're going to have. But that's just something that sometimes it feels weird because it's more abdominal, and so we definitely prep people for that. Also, then we're going to be talking about transfers, how to move afterwards. And so just to do like a big sit up out of bed is not a wise choice. And so thinking about log rolling or breathing out while you stand up, and just these little nuggets that we know helps restore or maintain just good coordination between the abdominals. Remember, those abdominals are cut through with the scopes or with an incision. So the body actually wants to avoid those abdominals, but we need them when we stand and when we walk and when we move. So we're doing everything that we can to decrease pressure and promote healthy muscle activation through those muscles during the necessary movements that people are doing post-op anyway. From another just like toileting standpoint, we're going to breathe as we're passing about, or we're going to exhale as we do that and not be pushing or straining if we can help it. Just even like in and out of a car, making sure that we're using whatever support we can and exhaling during that too. We really want to decrease that intra-abdominal pressure so that pressure from the inside of our abdomen isn't pushing out against those scope sites or out against any repairs internally there and straining the healing tissue there, or trying to avoid it compromising that healing. And then just some little other nuggets. We just think about little things that can be helpful is like using a little grabber, so that you are minimizing your bending, lifting, uncomfortable movements there. Sometimes just those little tools that we think are silly, just even not underestimating that you are having a major abdominal surgery, essentially. And whatever little strategies you can use to decrease just the unnecessary excess strain or movement on those abdominals is great. And then a lot of times the surgeon's going to educate you, or those post-op nurses are going to do a good job of like setting you up for success when you leave that surgical center. But usually they'll put like a 10-pound weight limit or some kind of a poundage weight limit on that. And that just is so that it's again for that intra-abdominal pressure. And so really we're working ahead of time. If you're coming in for us with prehab, we're working ahead of time to optimize the core and your breathing. Not that we're going to say go over that 10 pounds, but we're going to even make that 10 pounds less strenuous on your body than what maybe someone who hasn't gone through or doesn't know how to appropriately use their body mechanically sound. And so even usually when we have people that come through, that 10 pounds has pretty much zero effect on them because their body is efficient and it's optimized because we've reminded their body or we've emphasized areas to really make those movements efficient. And then obviously, just things that seem less therapeutic but are
Yeah.
absolutely necessary are like food prep before surgery. There's a lot of really good research, and there's even some like nutritionists that specialize in post-op nutrition. You think about it as our body's healing, we need to be fueling our
Yep.
body. It takes energy to heal. And so if we're not fueling our body, thinking about even things like, increasing our vitamin C to help with collagen healing and that tissue healing, right? And so people that are in that world and are much smarter than us, I mean, not much
Hmm.
smarter, but just more specialized in that area
Yep.
than we are, you can really get connected with some really cool resources. And we can definitely help out with what we know. But just thinking about being mindful of fueling the body with a healing perspective is something that I think that we overlook quite often too.
Yeah. And I mean, I definitely like, I talk to my patients beforehand. I'm like, okay, so what's your plan with meals? Like, have we started food prepping yet? Meal prepping? Do you have a meal train? Like, stuff like that. And that would be something that maybe you wouldn't even think of because you're like, oh, it's okay. I'll just get up. And really, you need to give yourself those couple of weeks to have that extra stuff prepped and ready to go because it can kind of take you off guard how fatigued you can be after this surgery. I mean, depending upon what they took, you could also have like a hormone shift happen, and hopefully they're addressing that before you even leave the, hospital, but still, it's something that like it's a big surgery, you guys, and I think that it gets forgotten quite a bit that you are removing an organ and or a couple because if you're getting your ovaries removed also, and just because it's laparoscopic does not mean that it's not a big deal. So we definitely want to keep in mind kind of the risk for a hernia or a dehisce after the surgery. And depending on, what exactly they did and depending on where the cuff is like attached or not or that sort of thing, we want to be safe with everything that we're doing. And so this is why, like Roxy mentioned, the inter-abdominal pressure is so important. Breathing and moving slow with progress in those first 6 weeks is so important because a lot of healing needs to happen. And it's not always better to do more in this case. Let's say a total knee, they get you going and it's just like, yeah, like keep your exercises going. The further you can bend, the better. Like keep it up, keep it up. And in this case, more is not necessarily better because so much internal healing needs to happen because of the way of this surgery. And so I think like keeping that in mind, we're typically like, yep, I'm good, bounce back culture. Like, let's just like go, I'm good, I can get back to work and all this stuff. And you may like look okay on the outside and you might be feeling okay, but there's still a lot of healing that is taking place. So please, please remember that. So hopefully as we've gone through this, you can understand a little bit more about like why the prehab appointments are helpful for that like pre-assessment, pre-training, pre-education, a little bit more about kind of what happens during that surgery and what can happen after as far as different pains go and the slowing down of the bowels and all that stuff. And then understanding kind of how those first few days, the important things to consider about different movement and transfers and breath and how everything that you can learn ahead of time, how you're going to implement that a bit during that after surgery. And then from there, which would be a whole nother conversation, is kind of the post-hab, like going in and like, what does it look like to do rehab after a hysterectomy? And that's where, we would go into talking about like once you're healed and we do this internal assessment and what is it that you're experiencing pain wise, et cetera. And then we would develop an individual plan to then essentially address any pelvic floor issues that you're having, abdominal issues, that kind of stuff. So again, that's like a whole nother conversation. It's so individualized, but essentially at that point, we just go into what we would do. Like we would just assess like we would any other kind of like pelvic floor issue coming in, knowing that you are like post-op. So hopefully this is helpful. And again, just remembering that this only seems to help our outcomes when it comes to this. And it can do nothing but empower you to heal faster and better and have a better understanding. Roxy, any last words on this?
I'm just thinking about how this really presents a beautiful and unique window of opportunity with post-op because we're resting anyway. I mean, I even just think with when I'm helping women prep for hysterectomy, the gains that we make with any other dysfunction, pelvic floor dysfunction that they're having, because when we can slow down and we can rest and then we remind our body how to work correctly, I see a lot of women make extra gains than they otherwise maybe would have because they're forced to rest, they're forced to really think about their body, and I think the silver lining of a procedure, no one wants to really stop life and,
Hmm.
be uncomfortable or be under the weather or need help or whatnot. But I really try to frame it that way, that it's a beautiful window of opportunity to remind your body as it's healing, remind it overcome bad habits or remind it how to work correctly and really restore sound mechanics that then set you up for success beyond this procedure.
Yeah. And just one thing to add with that, I just ran into somebody that just recently had a hysterectomy and I gave her all this information and a friend of mine. And I was just like, how are you feeling? And her surgery was like a couple weeks ago. And she was like, oh my gosh, I feel so good. Like, should I feel worse? And honestly, and she said, like, everything you sent me was just so helpful. She's like, I would have totally, like, in those first days, I was just, she had this discomfort and pain and abdomen, like everything we talked about. She's like, I probably would have thought something was wrong if we wouldn't have, talked about this. And she was like, I feel like I should be in more pain. And I was like, no, that's fantastic. And I said, and you're a couple weeks out. Like sometimes the fatigue can start to kind of hit as you start to get back to doing more activity. And that's why you build in that extra time because you do need to take it easy and you do need to rest. And so then you have to kind of build yourself back up again. So that's what we want to hear after these surgeries is I'm feeling really good. That's what we want. We do not want it to backfire and be like, oh my gosh, I'm in so much pain and I'm having all these complications and I feel terrible. So that's great. Like that's an ideal outcome. So anyway, hopefully this was helpful. And even if you are not in the time frame of experiencing a hysterectomy or having that, but you know somebody that might be, just send them on this podcast. We'd appreciate that. And until next time, we will keep the conversation going. Thank you so much for joining us this week on the Pelvis Project podcast. Help us continue the conversation by liking and sharing this episode with friends. And if you really want to do us a solid, leave us a review. If you'd like to follow us on social, check out the show notes for links. And remember, this week, take a deep breath and relax your pelvic floor.